This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. My guest today is Vincent. Is it Infanti? Did I get that right?
Infante.
Infante. Okay. Well, I'm never good with names. So you heard the voice of Vincent. And on Avoid the Maze, we talk about our journey through life. And, you know, I know as a young child, I saw this beautiful path I was going to walk down, all the wonderful things that were going to happen in my life. And some of them did, but many of those dreams did not come true. Or if they did come true, it's because I really had to work at it. And so Avoid the Maze is here to let everyone know that, you know what, life isn't perfect, but there is a way to get through the obstacles. So, Vince, when I read your bio on Podmatch, I related to a number of things in it. Um, and one of the things I related to, which so many of us don't even want to admit, is the symptom, the condition called depression. And you know what? We all hit it at some point, maybe at different levels. So give us a little backstory. Who was Vincent as a young kid, and who is Vincent today?
Well, I'll give you the backstory for sure because I think it's important. I want to ask a quick question just to the listeners, and then I'll introduce myself because I
Sure.
want to see anyone out there who's listening. I would love to know if you guys have struggled with depression, or how many of you have struggled with depression and know that you're meant for so much more. And I ask those questions because I want the listeners to keep that in mind as they hear my story today and they hear our conversation, because there's going to be a few answers in there.
Good.
So, who I was as a kid was someone who was really heavily bullied. I was someone who didn't have many friends, who didn't really get along with people. And a lot of that led to me having issues with confidence, self-esteem, connection, struggled with, struggled with wanting to be alive, right? A lot of suicidal ideation, some self-harm. There was a lot of things that went on in my childhood that basically put me in a state of victimhood. I was living in a victim mentality, continuing to feel helpless to not only change my life, but change my circumstance, which I'm sure anyone out there listening who's ever struggled with any type of, depression or anything like that could really relate to it.
Well, and it's again, it's a word that some people banter around as, just an excuse as to maybe why they're feeling down. But the reality of it is depression is something real. And when you are in that state, sometimes it's hard to see forward because everything is sort of like on your shoulders. You have these voices in your head, and we all have voices in our head, but you have these voices in your head that are telling you you're not good enough. And when you're bullied, you just sort of stand there and take it because you're not good enough. You don't know how to fight back. Do you have an essence of when you started to feel this way? And did you put a name to it? Did you tell anybody about it?
When you're younger, you have awareness of different things that maybe you don't really have friends, or maybe you don't really fit in, or perhaps you people joke around with you a little bit more than some of the other kids. And you also tend to notice things like people will laugh at other kids' jokes but not yours, right? And so there's those subtle things that you start noticing. It's like, how come nobody finds me funny? How come nobody wants to sit next to me? How come nobody wants to spend time with me? How come I'm always picked last for everything? And so, no, I would say as a kid, you don't really think about the context of, what's going on in my life and really being able to label it, because you don't really have the cognitive awareness yet. And that's okay. Um, I've also learned that when I was younger, telling people doesn't make things better. It usually would make them worse, especially if you're somebody who's getting bullied. Because, I had told, there was one story where I had told the assistant, sorry, not the assistant principal, the dean, So there was an incident that I was going down the steps. Now, I had been getting picked on a lot, and my mom and I decided to enroll me in karate. So I went to karate, and my sensei was basically telling me, he's like, you have to learn to stand up for yourself. I said, well, what if the kids are bigger than me? Or what if, I don't know how to fight or whatever? He's like, you got to learn to just do it for yourself. You have to learn to hold your ground, and you have to learn to stand up to bullies. He's like, so if someone bullies you, stand up to them. And looking back on it, that's some terrible advice to give to a kid who's getting bullied and doesn't know shit about defending himself.
Right.
Because he's telling me this is like my second or third class in. I still don't even know how to defend myself or anything. He's just like, stand up for yourself. So I'm like, okay. I mean, I was an impressionable kid. And the reality is I didn't want to keep getting bullied. So it sounds appealing, right? You don't think any better. You're like 11 years old. So I'm in middle school. I'm going down the steps. And this kid at the time, he's like, move, retard. And I'm like, I'll go when I'm ready. And now, mind you, this kid is like, he's one of those freaks that even though he's in middle school, he looks like he should be entering into college.
Yeah.
Like he was almost 6 feet tall. And I'm like, I don't know, 5 foot nothing. And so he's like, what'd you say? I said, I'll go when I'm ready. He's like, the hell you are. He's like, you're going to go now. And he threw me down the steps. So I got a little hurt. I was upset. I went to the dean and I told him exactly what happened. He said, well, what happened? I said, well, I've been going to karate and my sensei told me I need to learn to stand up to myself because I've been getting bullied a lot. And so, this kid keeps picking on me and he told me to go down the steps and I told him no. Like I said, I'll go when I'm ready to go. And he threw me down the steps. And he's like, oh, okay, so I see what's going on here. I said, all right. So he says, yeah, we're gonna arrange a meeting with the principal. I said, okay. So later that day after school, we go to the principal, and the principal says, so what's going on here? And so the dean says, well, I'll tell you exactly what happened. This tough guy over here started taking karate and thinks he's ready to fight everyone. So he antagonized him, and then they got into an argument, and he got pushed down the steps. So he started the whole thing. So I got somewhat in trouble. He said, you can't antagonize kids, this, that, blah, blah, blah. It's not a good look, all this. And then the other kid, he said, listen, I get he was bothering you. He was antagonizing you, but you can't put your hands on him. So nobody technically got in trouble, but both of us got in trouble. And then what that does is that sets a precedent, right? Because
Right.
now throughout the kind of the school year, if anything else happens, it's already indicated that I am an antagonist of the issues that come up. So it labels me as someone who's going out there picking fights when it's also ridiculous. I'm this
Right.
small kid, I can't defend myself, and now I'm labeled as a person who's going picking fights with people that are like triple his size, which also makes no sense.
Right.
So you learn pretty early on, you don't really want to tell people, at least in my life, I learned I didn't really want to tell people because it just tends to make things worse. And that was one of many scenarios I could go through.
You know, my youngest son, who's now in his early 30s, went through very similar situations. A lot he didn't even come home and tell us
Hmm.
because he wanted to look like, hey, I fit in and everything's all right. But I think it was in fifth or sixth grade, his class had a trip to Washington, D.C. He was all set to go, and I was supposed to go as a chaperone. So I had taken time off work. I was all ready. And the day before they were supposed to go, he got picked on pretty badly. And he ended up in the vice principal's office, not the kids who were picking on him, just him. And
Mm.
I got called to school and I was told for his safety, he can't go to Washington, D.C. And I looked at them and I said, but he got picked on. How about those three boys? They don't go to Washington, D.C. No, we're going to keep him safe. And guess what? You can take the time to be with him over the next couple of days. He doesn't have to come to school. Take him to the museum here in Cleveland, do whatever you want with him. And I just looked at the principal and I said, so what is he learning? And what are those other boys learning? And I saw this happening over and over again. And not just with my son, but with many young people today. And I don't understand, because we say, if you have a problem, go tell a trusting adult. So in your case, it should have been the dean and the principal. They should have been the trusting adults, but they weren't.
Right.
So how did you learn how to deal with that as time went on? Because that's got to set a tone in your head. I can't trust anybody.
Well, I dealt with it at the younger age by exactly that, not trusting anybody. So I didn't tell my parents what was going on. I didn't let anyone in. But my mom was also, she was a good mom. She was also a little overprotective. So she would also be the mom that if I told her, she would call the school, and then things are worse.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting, the kids getting called to the office saying that, hey, Vin's mom called and said, blah, blah. So I learned you can't tell anybody anything. So I didn't tell anybody anything until I like figured all my stuff out at about 23. When I started really kind of figuring out life and understanding things differently is when I kind of started telling people differently and understanding that it's not, it doesn't have to be a blanket, because the brain likes to generalize things, right?
Right.
It likes to say, well, I told this one person and I got screwed over, so now I can't tell anyone. And so kind of reworking that and saying, well, this was unique to this guy, or this was unique to me being in middle school. Like my mom is not going to call if somebody's bothering me at work. My mom's not going to call my job
Right.
and,
Right.
and tell them, right? So I think that you kind of learn as you get older, right? Or you're supposed to. You're supposed to reflect. You're supposed to learn a little bit. You're supposed to stop generalizing as much, but you can't really help it when you're younger. And I always like to tell people that. I tell clients that. I tell people I talk to is that you're not you're not responsible for the programming you receive as a child, but as you get older, you're 100% responsible for the way you conduct yourself in life. Because as a kid, I'm not responsible for learning that I can't trust any adults or anybody. However, as I get older, it is my responsibility to learn that that was a belief built in to protect me. And that was a belief built in that was serving me at one point, but does not serve me anymore. And now I have the work to do to start being more open and trusting and building, safe relationships and looking for the right people to connect with, etc. But a lot of the times, and I preface it with this, a lot of the times people tend to stop themselves from growing, right? So if
Absolutely.
I were to sit here at my current age and say that I still don't believe you could trust people, and I reference back to that time that the dean kind of screwed me over, what I'm actually saying is I have not grown as a person since I was 11. So for over 20 years, I've been living the same way as if I was 11 in at least that category, right? Because we can compartmentalize.
Sure.
So that's one of the biggest things that I challenge people to look at. If you're still struggling with something that happened in your childhood, what the true statement is that you have not actually grown since that age. You have not grown as a person, you have not developed, and you have not learned to take some form of accountability, ownership, or responsibility, even if you didn't do the thing that happened, for the part you played in it, or for how you continue to enact it going forward, because there's always some way that you are contributing to the state of your life or your belief system or how you respond to the world.
So how did you get the help to get to where you are now? Because one of the things you talk about is, um, if you don't move forward, if you don't work through those things, um, you're just going to be dormant. Okay, you're going to keep taking it on and on. And for a good majority of my life, and I want to say probably for the first 50 years, I believed I had to be that perfect person all the time. And of course, I was making mistakes along the way. And those mistakes I was making looked like humongous. And when I turned 50 and went back to college, I realized I'm not stupid.
Mm.
Um, Look what I'm doing. And I learned how to, all of a sudden, it was going back, getting good grades, enjoying what I was doing, that I could pat myself on the back, which I had never done before. And I thank my professors in college for whatever they said, whatever they did that made my thinking change. But something has to help us make that change.
Mm,
Otherwise, we're just going to remember all the things mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and the dean said to us.
right. So what you're asking is who helped me on my journey,
Right.
if anyone at all? Okay, that's a good question. So I have come to find that not really many people have been able to help me on my journey. I've come to see that now I was in and out of therapy. I shouldn't say in and out. I was in therapy for quite a few years. I was in therapy from high school until about the time I was 23. And I can't say it helped me. I was seeing guidance counselors virtually my whole life. When I was younger in middle school, I saw guidance counselors slash priests while I was in high school because I went to a Catholic high school. And I also saw the therapist. So I had a lot of people there, but I can't say anyone really helped. In fact, life seemingly continued to get worse, even with all the support I had. Where in my college years, I was struggling the most. Like my emotional well-being was probably at the lowest. My mental capacity was at the lowest. My ability to perform was at the lowest. I was struggling heavily with anxiety and panic disorder. I was having panic attacks every time I needed to make a decision. Life was getting harder and harder. And at 23 years old, I had a very life-changing moment. Now there's a lot of stuff that goes before that, right? But one of the things that I'll tell you right before I go into that life-changing moment is a little chain of events that led up to that. In high school, I realized that I didn't like the person I was. That the person I was getting bullied and made fun of and had no friends and didn't fit in, couldn't get a girlfriend, all this stuff that I wanted to wash my hands of. And so you've probably heard the saying before, you have to get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
It-
And for me, high school was kind of that, where I was sick and tired of this and I wanted to reinvent myself. So going into college, what I did was I changed my name on my transcript from Vincent to Vincenzo. And in doing so, it was a subtle change, but it gave me a different persona. Now, it started to work where I started having friends, girls started becoming interested in me. I was working out, I was doing good in school for once. However, on the inside, I still had all of those issues that I wasn't really working on or figuring out. And so that continued until I was about 23, where panic attacks were getting worse, mental breakdowns were there. I wanted to drop out of school multiple times. I was fed up with people. I had all types of attachment issues where I would push people away because I would get easily offended if some guys went out without calling me, or if a girl didn't text me back. I was super upset. Like my day would be ruined. Like if I liked a girl and I text her and she didn't answer me for X amount of hours, I'd be miserable. The minute she answered me, I'd be happy again. So, right, terrible attachment style there, anxious attachment
right.
style. And same with friends. So I saw three guys I knew. They were out. How come they didn't text me? How come they didn't call me? They must not like me. And then I'd wind up texting them and be like, hey, what are you up to? Like as if I didn't know. So all the ways I was trying to overcompensate for this lack of sense of self and security in myself and confidence and self-esteem, all of these things. Now at 23, I graduated with my master's to start practicing psychotherapy. And in addition to that, I had taken a little bit of time off. Now I was working two jobs. I was interning and going to school full time. And so I quit both my jobs. I obviously was done with school and no more interning. What I did was I tried to spend time figuring myself out. I went out, I did things I wanted to, I spent money on things I wanted, and seemingly nothing was really helping though. Like I still wasn't happy, even though I should have been, right? Because at that point, I had a hot girl, I had a nice car, got myself a nice sports car that I wanted, Camaro SS. I had a great career ahead of me. I was young at 23, right? So what is it that should still be making my life miserable? Well, society would tell you nothing, right? And that's how I started to get even more frustrated because now the question is, if I have everything, how could I still be miserable? So now it was really confusing for me. And so one day I went into the bathroom at my parents' house, and that's where I was still living at the time. And I was just utterly and completely frustrated with life. And so I slammed my hands on the counter and I was just like, what is wrong with me? Why am I still so upset? Why am I still so frustrated? Why is life seemingly still not good despite the fact that I have so much and I have everything? So now I just can't figure this out. And I finally take a second. I just kind of breathe, I clear the air. And then I look at myself in the mirror and I had a very interesting realization. And I said to myself, I was like, oh my God, I get it now. You're Vincent. And why that was so powerful and important was because I had just spent 7 years, one, not saying my own name, and two, trying to become someone else, not embracing who I am, who I've been, who I'm going to be, who I was in that moment, because I wasn't willing to accept all of the things that came with being Vincent. So the solution was to create this new persona that honestly didn't help me much aside from external validation. And so when I did that, and I took my power back and I owned my name, there was multiple tools that kind of came out of that because it was a very clarifying moment for me where I just got honest and I said, well, who are you right now? And I said, well, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm a loser. Nobody likes me, nobody's inspired by me, I'm not a leader, I have nothing to really offer to people. And it might sound brutal, but it was true. Like that's why I created Vincenzo, right? And a lot of people don't
Right.
get that. I created this persona because all of that was true in my mind. And so if I couldn't own that, I could never change it because the big key is you can never fix a problem that isn't yours. And if you don't own something, it ain't yours. So once I owned who I was, then I asked, who do you want to be? Who do you want to become? What is the person you would like to create? And that was very easy too, because it was pretty much the opposite of all that. I said, I want to be happy, inspiring. I want to be a leader. I want to be powerful. I want to be helpful. I want to be empathetic and loving and caring, all these great things. And then I challenged myself through a few tools and methodologies that I've now created. Kind of your point before is like, did I know at the time? I didn't. But now I've reflected. I'm like, oh, this is a process I've created.
Right.
And so in that process, then I started becoming the person you see here. And funny enough, after that conversation with myself in the mirror, that was the day right before my last therapy session because I walked in, told my therapist I'm good, I've got it, and I never went back to therapy.
I love it. I really do. You know, just listening to your story, um, it's almost like you and my son have lived almost parallel lives. Um, he was diagnosed at the age of 6 being on the autism spectrum. So one day he was this normal kid, and the next day, because of a diagnosis, he became a different kid. Not because he did, but all of us around him started treating him differently.
Mm-hmm.
And when my husband and I made the choice, we're not going to treat him differently. He was already in that mold by his doctors, by his therapists, by his teachers, and his classmates. But his doctor said to us one day, he said, I guarantee you, when he turns 25, he's going to become the young man he wants to be. And I looked at him, I thought, how can you tell me that?
Yeah.
And it's almost true because he had been in therapy almost like you, on and off for most of his life. But he'd walk out of therapy and he'd say, yeah, I told them I would do that. But you know what? That doesn't fit my mold. I'm not going to do it. And it wasn't until he got into cognitive therapy when he was 25 that the light went out and was like, oh, so when I look in the mirror, if I don't tell myself I'm ugly, I'm not ugly.
Mm.
And the therapist said, just tell me what you really see. Because his whole life he kept saying, I can't get a girl because I'm ugly. I can't get this because of this. And we have seen that progression of change. And after a couple of years of therapy, he too quit, like you, began his life. But then he found that he had been holding something back his whole life. Well, not his whole life, since high school. And he
Long
finally,
enough.
yep. And he was 30 years old at the time. And he came to me and he said, I don't think Dad will judge me, but I know you won't. I have to tell you something. And he told us he had been molested by a schoolmate in front of other people.
Wow.
And I just looked at him. Now, my first reaction as a mother was, why didn't you tell me? He said, what would you have done, Mom? You would have called his parents. You probably would have called the police. They have more money. Guess what? My life would have been worse because you got involved. But I can tell you this now because I just learned he passed away.
Mm.
And again, there was that turning point where he's finally said, I have to make some changes. Okay. I'm now coming out with this and I'm reliving it, but I can't let this control me going forward. So, for our listeners out there, what is it that you offer your clients that would be different from somebody else? And I know a lot of it has to do from what you've been through, but how do you help your clients?
Sure. Well, I think, and that's always one of the interesting questions, because a lot of people say, well, what makes you different? Most of the things that make people different is just their personality. Like there's me, there's 10 trillion other coaches, 10 trillion other therapists, a million mentors. There's all these influential and inspirational people online. Why me? I don't know, because people feel it. People feel connected. People like what I have to say. People resonate with my story. And the things that I teach are the things that I have done to overcome my own issues and continue to utilize in my life. So, what I teach is, I call it the 5 aspects of mastery. So, these are the concepts that I came up with where I was talking about it before when I said, who do you want to become? So when you get to that question of who do you want to become, right? Let's just use one of the examples I said. Well, I want to be a leader. So that's pretty simple. What does a leader say? What do they do? How do they treat others? Right? And what's interesting in that is when you ask all those questions, what you're actually doing is building the most empowering version or the most empowering persona you can of that role. Because I believe that you can't utilize the 5 aspects of mastery without having an understanding of internal leadership and how we have multiple roles and multiple ways we show up in this life. And if you're not committed to showing up in that role in the most powerful way you can, then the reality of it is that you are not going to be able to define it and act on it. So you want to get granular, you want to get clear. You want to say, if I want to be a leader, what would a leader say, do? How would they act? How would they respond? How would they treat others? What would they think about? What would they feel? What would they make others feel? You have all these great questions. Now, to put these great questions into play, once you're clear on it, right? Like, let's just use one example from that and say, how would a leader make other people feel? I'd like to think a leader makes other people feel better about themselves when he's in the room or when there's the leader's presence is involved. So now that we have that as an understanding, now you want to talk about the 5 aspects of mastery, and you want to talk about, okay, there's only 5 things in this world you can control. Everything else is outside of your control. When we have a sense of control, we have a sense of certainty. When we have a sense of certainty, we have some sort of competency. We have confidence, right? Like when you go to do something for the first time, are you usually confident in it? The answer is no. Are you ever competent in it? Probably not, because it's your first time. So how do you start getting that? Well, you have to be absolutely certain that you know you can handle or do whatever you need to do. So getting into the 5 aspects of self-mastery is that it's going to teach you how to focus on what you can do or what you can focus on to actually create change and impact in your life. So 5 aspects are as follows. The only things you can control in life are your thoughts, your emotions, your language, your behaviors, and your actions. And as you put emphasis on those 5, everything else does not need to be emphasized. And in fact, if you're focusing on anything else, you're probably going to have a sense or a feeling that life is unstable, life is out of control. You probably get dragged through life. You're somewhat passively experiencing it. Life feels hard for you. It feels difficult. That's always coming out of a place of not having a sense of control, not having a sense of mastery. So in these 5 aspects of mastery, it gives you the opportunity to take your power back. It gives you the opportunity to say, everything that's going on out of here does not matter that much because I can't do anything about these things. However, I can do something about all of this. And all of this is what I want to guide me forward in my life. All of this is what will not only help me become the person I want to become, but it will create the life that I want to experience and live. And so when you start focusing more on your internal world, you notice how heavily the external world changes, because the biggest reality is this: we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. your life is a reflection of what you believe. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. You're going to get it. And more importantly, your subconscious mind is going to set out to keep it in alignment to that. So if you believe your life is crappy and things happen to you, your subconscious mind will continue to find those things to prove you right, because it wants to prove you right, because it believes that's what you want. That's who you want to be. That's how you want to see things. That's what you want to know about life. Conversely, if you could change that, if you can start getting yourself to this place where you think about life differently, where you believe that life is actually beautiful or good, or it has potential, or you're meant for more than you're currently experiencing, or that you can always overcome, whatever the case is, your subconscious mind will act on that. It'll start helping you become creative. It will start helping you solve problems, overcome issues, but it all starts within. So that's why I created these aspects of the 5 aspects of mastery and internal leadership. These are not only the things that I have utilized to transform my life, but they're also the things that I know produces results. Like, these are what I work with my clients with. This is where people start truly transforming their lives, because all life comes down to is a sense of control and a sense of self, or not. And so you get to choose every single day.
You know, I love it. And we're going to make sure that we lead everybody to your website so they can learn more. But I have to tell you, and all our listeners, you are never too old to make the changes in your life to be the person you want to be.
Right.
You know, like I said, my biggest transformation happened right around my 50th birthday. It was like, do I always want to be doing for everybody else? I like doing for people, but not everybody. And when I'm giving myself to everybody, I left nothing for me. And there was that internal feeling that I was only good enough when I was giving.
Mm.
So I didn't know how to accept things and take things back.
Mm.
At my 50th birthday, my oldest son surprised me and came into Cleveland for my birthday. I was excited to see him. But in the back of my mind, it was, why is he wasting his time here?
Mm.
Why did he waste his money? You know, he could have called me. And it took me a number of years after that, as I started digging deep. Why do
Mm.
I feel this way? And the reason was because I was giving, I didn't know how to take back. And
Mm.
so I started letting people know what I wanted. And if
Yeah.
they didn't want to give it to me, that was okay. Because you know what? They've got to do what is right for them. But it started making me much stronger, more focused. And again, I have clients who are in their 70s and 80s, and they're saying, I'm really happy in life. And that's what I think it all boils down to.
Mm. I don't think that there is ever a wrong age. I had a client sign up recently with me who's 55 or 56. We're rediscovering purpose for him. We're finding new meaning in his life. Now, interestingly enough, and I think this is something that a lot of parents kind of get uh entrapped in, maybe is the word, is that they give so much to their children, and then they kind of come out on the other side in their 50s, and they're like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what fills me up. I don't know what I enjoy. I don't know who I want to be. And no matter what level of success, like, this guy runs a very successful business. He's not in any way, shape, or form struggling in life. It's purely, I've spent all my time on my kid and my business. And now my business is in a place where it's doing so well, I don't really have to do much in it anymore. And my kid isn't here. My kid's out of the house. I see my kid not as often. My kid isn't as big an issue. And funny enough, his child was actually diagnosed with autism, pretty heavy. So there was even more involvement than the average parent. But it's so interesting because people tend to think, well, I'm a certain age, my life is over, and that can't be further from the truth, because you can invent and reinvent yourself at any time you want. One of the stories I like to tell is about having 3 careers in 3 years. And but at 28, I was a therapist. At 29, I was a firefighter, and at 30, I was a full-time entrepreneur. I literally had a new career at least once every year for 3 years. And that was a pretty funny one. Now, I was in therapy for over 10 years before I made that transition, right? But it's interesting because I think a big part of why I was in therapy for 10 years was because I felt like I was kind of stuck. I felt like I didn't want to give it up. I worked for so hard to achieve this, and now I'm just going to quit and throw it in. And that's another common problem people run into. I've had conversations with people who are in their 40s, and I'm like, what do you want to do with your life? And they're like, I don't really know. So I said, well, why don't you try some things? And they're like, I don't want to waste time. I'm like, but you're wasting time by doing another year in the job you hate anyway. And then 5 to 10 years from now, you're going to sit there and you're going to be like, oh, now I've been here for another 10 years and I hate it. And it's silly because the same thing you're afraid of doing is actually exactly what you're doing because you're not willing to take a chance on yourself. And I think that's what people get scared of, right? They're like, well, I know this, it's safe and convenient and comfortable. But if I take a chance on me and it doesn't work, then what do I do? And it's like, well, then figure that out. But at
Exactly.
least take your chance, take a shot, give it a go.
It's interesting. In April, my son, who now lives in Texas, was having had emergency surgery. So I flew down there to be with him. And most of the time I was sitting at my computer working while he was in bed recovering. But we had this conversation. He said, so Mom, you've been podcasting for over 10 years now. He said, I know you don't give out advice, but you certainly share information. You bring on, guests who share information. Why aren't you doing what you always really wanted to do?
Hmm.
And I looked at him and I said, and what was that? He said, well, I know you wanted to be a therapist, but you never really fulfilled that dream. I said,
Hmm.
well, I'm certainly glad I'm not a therapist because I've been to therapists and I probably would have been like most of them, and that was not good for me. I said, I don't want somebody to turn it around and say, because your mother yelled at you when you were 5 years old, that's why you're yelling at your son. He said, but you've been working with coaches. Why aren't you coaching? Little did he know I got my certificate over 2 years ago, and I've
Hmm.
been taking online classes. And I looked at him and I said, why is it you know more about me than I know about myself?
Hmm.
And that's when it hit me. It's like, okay, it's okay to reinvent yourself.
Yep.
And I'm not doing it 100%. I'm doing it so that I can enjoy what I'm doing. I can enjoy the podcasting. I can enjoy, coaching, and I can
Hmm.
enjoy being the mom who stands in the kitchen and bakes. So that's what life should be. It should be about those enjoyments.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not living an aligned life, if you're not living a fulfilled life, it's not going to be a good one. And I think that people, especially in today's society, I think that people get caught up in the hype culture of a good fulfilled life is a Lamborghini, a $10 million mansion, and a $5 million yacht. And that's not a good or fulfilled life. A good or fulfilled life is about doing whatever brings your life meaning. And I'll be one of the first people to say, I don't think everybody should live that kind of lifestyle. Most people don't want to be entrepreneurs. Most people don't want to do the workload or live with the fear or the uncertainty of it or live with the stress of it. Like there's a lot of crap that comes with being self-employed. Now, if you make it, oh yeah, like you're going to be living a hell of a life. However, most people don't make it, right? 95% of businesses fail in the first year. And then after that, there's another crazy number is like 95% of the businesses that still exist after the first year aren't even profitable. So now you're living for a few years with no money. It's a stressful life. And so I don't encourage people to become entrepreneurs. I just encourage people to become the best versions of themselves, whatever that means. Like you might not want to be an entrepreneur, but maybe you really love kids. You want to have 4 kids and be the best parent you could be. Please do. Maybe you want to climb the corporate ladder and you want to work all the way from a novice employee to a COO or a management position because that would make you feel fulfilled. Do that. Or maybe you are like myself or somebody else out there who wants to create a massive impact and wants to be an entrepreneur and wants to be stressed 24/7 and work 48 jobs for free mostly so that you can get paid for one thing you do. And if that's the case, do that. But whatever you do, just make sure you're happy because as long as you're happy, you're going to do it at a higher capacity. And if you do it at a higher capacity, you're going to get better results. And if you get better results, your life is better overall.
I love it.
So it's not about the hustle culture. It's about fulfillment and alignment.
So, Vincent, how can our listeners find you? Maybe get coaching from you if that's what they're interested in.
Sure. So they could go over to my website, www.vincentinfante.life. There's also a free resource on my website I would love for people to download. It is called a mission board template. It is my version of a vision board. It's better than a typical vision board for two reasons. One is because I made it, and number two,
I love that.
and number two is because of the fact that it is more intentional and directed and guided to help you actually get the most out of it. It doesn't just tell you to make a collage. There's actual direction to utilizing this. And I also encourage people to just check out my socials. You could find me on Instagram as @vin.infante. Find me on LinkedIn at @vininfante or TikTok at vin.infante. So I'm pretty much everywhere. Or you could just Google me. My name's out there.
Well, and we're going to put all that in the show notes. So for those of you listening and you said, hey, I missed it, just go back to the show notes, read them, click on the links, because that's what we love to share with each other. Vincent, it's been wonderful meeting you. I am so glad you're in this space that you're in now. And you've got that toolbox to take with you for life that will help you, because we all hit that obstacle, no matter how great things are going. That's why we call it avoid the maze, because when you get there, if you have that toolbox, open it up and take out the tool that's going to lead you down the path.
Love it.
Well, have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.